another episode of RPG Reviews. It's that time of year again, where everyone is dressing up in weird costumes. Ghosts and ghouls of every type wander the streets, and every house in the neighborhood appears to be haunted. I'm talking about, of course, it's Halloween. I know it's my favorite time of year, and as a gamer, I'm starting to think about eschewing my regular campaign for a week or two and scaring the pants off my players with a good horror RPG. What about you? Now, there are quite a few RPGs out there, such as World of Darkness and Call of Cthulhu, and they are great games. However, if you're looking to run a one-shot game, you are looking to induce the maximum amount of immersion and tension as possible, and you really want to involve your players. If that's the case, then I would recommend the Dread role-playing game. In this review, I'm going to point out the positives of this game and talk about its innovations. If you watch my reviews on a regular basis, you know that innovation is something that really gets me excited about a game, and sometimes maybe I use the word too loosely. But in the case of Dread, it has it in spades. I'm not even kidding. In fact, it doesn't even claim to be an RPG, only a game of horror and hope. The first thing about Dread that really sets it apart from other role-playing games is its character creation system. Not a statistic in sight. Everything is determined by a series of leading questions prepared by the host beforehand and answered by the player. The only rule is you must accept the premise of a question. For example, if the host's question is, "Why did you kill that old lady?" you can't say, "I didn't kill an old lady." You have to accept that your character killed an old lady. However, you are totally free to determine the circumstances, the method, the old lady's name, and all the details of what happened and when. On EndWorld, there's a great post that I will paraphrase here, as for me, it really is the epitome of what the character creation process offers. In this instance, the host, that's the Dread game's term for the game master, had decided one of the characters was a 1920s flapper and thus created the questionnaire accordingly. But what he got back was, well, rather unexpected. And I quote, "My game was set in the 1920s. Zath played a flapper in her early 20s. I originally pictured her as a sort of innocent, a rich girl having naughty fun. But one of the questions was very innocuous. Where did you get those shoes?" And the player's answer, paraphrased here, was completely character-defining. "I was at a Harlem speakeasy, swilling hooch with one of my friends when she tried to make a move on one of my swells. Once my friend had passed out, I took her into the alley around back and stripped her of her money and clothes. I left her there, naked, and went on home. Her shoes look wonderful on me, and they're still my favorite pair." Wow. Okay, character established, and a lot darker and amoral than I had anticipated, and that character was evident in everything she did during the game. Okay, let me say that again. Wow. Pretty creative on the player's part, and how juicy for the host to work with. This is the opportunity that Dread offers. The game master and the players create the background together, which makes immersion at the start of the session almost instantaneous. Other aspects of a character can be established as the game progresses, and that is frequently determined by the other, rather bizarre but defining innovation of the game. A pull from the tower. And that's right, Dread does not use dice. But that's not to say there is no randomization or chance of failure. Indeed, quite the opposite is true, and this is what makes Dread totally unique in the annals of RPGs. For task resolution, Dread uses a Jenga tower. Yeah, that's right, Jenga. Essentially, the host has total narrative control over the game, until a player says otherwise, at which point the host may require a pull or 2 or 3 from the tower. If the player refuses the pulls, then the character fails the task. However, if they pull the required blocks from the tower and restack them successfully, then the task succeeds. However, If the player causes the tower to fall, then their character dies. Yeah, that's right, they die. Or they could be removed from the session for some story-related reason, but generally during the story, whatever the reason is, the host will narrate the character's bloody, horrible, and gruesome death. The tower is then rebuilt, and the action continues from that point. Thus, the game starts off relatively easy, as pulls from the tower at the start are generally not that difficult. But as the game progresses, the story becomes more intense, and the tower's stability becomes more and more precarious. The tension wraps tightly like a rubber band until someone dies in a bloody mess. Thus, the state of the tower should mirror or parallel the state of the story. As you wonder if this pull will be your last in the game, so too your character might be wondering if the blood-crazed, machete-wielding maniac is perhaps just around the corner, waiting to deal a final, painful, horrific blow. Now, once the tower falls, tension eases, the tower is rebuilt, and once more the build-up of tension resumes. Characters are killed off, one by one. It's a beautiful thing. Dread tells one kind of story, only one kind, which is somewhat of a drawback, and I'll get to that in a minute, but it tells it really well, and that is the survival horror story. A group of teenagers visiting a friend's cabin in the remote woods for a weekend of partying and sex. At the same time, a crazed maniac escapes from the mental institution, and the teenagers are slowly eviscerated in gruesome ways over the course of the story, one by one. Or, a group of scientists are in a secret underground lab engaging in vile genetic experiments. When one test subject gets loose, the secret lab is locked down, and the scientists are left to fend for themselves against a vile monstrosity of their own creation, and so on. The host comes up with a story, and the players questionnaires. A Dread story contains certain elements. A group of characters that are together, for whatever reason, become isolated in some way, and then something horrible happens, and the characters start dying. A group of people are invited up to an old house that a mutual friend had recently inherited, and it turns out the house is haunted by malevolent and homicidal spirits, and so on. If this is the kind of horror story you want to tell, the survival horror story, then Dread is your game. It's absolutely perfect for one-shots, where the story only continues for 1 or 2 sessions, and great for people who don't normally play role-playing games. There is no number crunching, no min-maxing. It's pure RPG horror fun. That said, there are some negatives to the game as well. Due to its very nature, it certainly does not cater to the ongoing campaign. So if that is what you're looking for, then Dread is not your game. Also, characters die. A lot. Which in my mind can be a bit of a drawback, especially if you spent quite a bit of time giving detailed answers to the 15 or 20 questions on the questionnaire, only to die 30 minutes into the game session. The task resolution system, while amazingly innovative, still has a few drawbacks. The first being that for a player to succeed, they themselves need some manual dexterity. In addition, it's a succeed or die system. You either successfully pull from the tower, or your character dies. Then, the act of actually pulling from the tower can be rather time-consuming, especially later in the game when the tower becomes precarious and multiple pulls are required. Then, when the tower falls, it takes a bit of time to reset. To me, that disrupts the verisimilitude of the experience. Finally, the game only tells one type of horror story, the survival horror story, which clearly limits its appeal. All of that said, Dread is a great game. The character creation system is a total gem, and the task resolution system creates the appropriate level of suspense. It does exactly what it sets out to do, tell a narrative-driven, emotionally compelling, high-tension survival horror story in the form of a role-playing game. The downside, if you can call it that, is that Dread is really only appropriate for one-shot scenarios. And since Dread was specifically designed for the one-shot game, it's hard to be critical of that aspect of it. However, given the time of year and the desire for gaming groups to do a one-shot horror game, Dread is exactly perfect, which is why I'm making this video. Now, all of that being said, if you don't like the Jenga tower, the book does offer alternate ways of resolving tasks, such as pick up sticks, dice stacking, and so on. However, it all still involves manual dexterity on the part of the player of some type. Of course, knowing me, I'm not one to leave well enough alone, and I wanted to get a bit more out of it. And I really loved the character creation system. And essentially, what the Jenga tower represents is a countdown timer. So I began thinking about alternatives to it that would allow for a more dynamic and robust system, and a wider range of stories, but it would also keep the tension that the tower provides. So after a bit of work, I came up with a little something that I'm going to share with you in my next video. So please look out for that. But that pretty much ends this video for now. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope you found it useful. Thank you so much for watching. And please check out my other video reviews and subscribe. And as always, my friends, may your Jenga tower remain steady. And game on!